Sven has worked in the energy sector for 20 years. As you will hear from his accent, he's from Germany. He's been working around technical analysis of renewable energy systems and how to integrate that into energy markets for a very long time. He's written over 50 special reports, including being the lead author of the IPCC's special report into renewables in 2011. He's written 5 global energy scenarios about how we can get to 100% renewables. He's written the World Wind Council's World Wind Outlook and a whole bunch more besides. He was also, as we're talking about the energy ecosystem, developer and founder of Germany's first cooperative energy utility, Greenpeace's Energy EG. He's got a PhD from the University of Flensburg in the integration of renewables into power systems, and he's one of Australia's and the world's leading experts on how to do this. So I'm very excited that we're working with him here at UTS. Please make him welcome.
Thanks, Nicky. Yeah, I came to Australia 2 years ago. I consider myself now as a Germozzie, so in a transition from German to Aussie. I'm zooming in from the global side, and I provide an overview about the global energy, renewable energy market, power market, and then move to Australia. That should work now. Yeah. Very bright. I've been told that it's very bright, but I did not expect it so bright. Anyway, this very colorful thing here you see is the power plant market, the global power plant market since 1970. I would not go into all the colors, but you see 2 things. One is in the last 10 to 15 years, the overall market for new power plants increased drastically. And that's due to 2 factors. One, the old industrialized energy market, the power market, the power plants come to age and they need to be replaced. And at the same time, the developing world actually starts to electrify and adds more power plants. That means that the power plant market almost doubled in the last 15 years. And Australia is actually in a position that we actually need to replace a lot of power plants. The average coal power plant which provides still the bulk of power in Australia, is about 30, 35 years old. So in the last, since 2005, due to wind first and then solar second, the share of renewable energy generators increased by over 200%, and that's a good thing. In terms of the market, if we see the last 10 years, the market shares from solar, from the global power plant market, went from 1% in 2004 to 28% last year. So basically, what we see is solar photovoltaics and wind take a huge share now on new power plants. And that's due to the fact that after quite a bit of development, the solar photovoltaics and wind are the most cheapest power generators in the world. So it's cheaper than gas, it's definitely cheaper than coal, new coal power plants, and by an order of magnitude cheaper than nuclear power plants. And you see the red, little slice red is new nuclear power plants. It remained irrelevant over the last 15 years and hovering around 1% to 3%. It was about 4% last year, and more than half of that was built in China, which were power plants which are already under construction the last 10 years. The global coal power plant market also boomed. So you hear, and you probably have heard that quite often, that every week China sort of installs a new or connects a new coal power plant to the grid. That was true over the last around 10, 15 years, 10, 12 years. That's not the case anymore. Because first, the electricity demand increased not as far as predicted. There's quite a bit of overcapacity in the power market in China. And secondly, China adds a lot of renewables as well. So you see that in 2016, the first bar, the gray bar, there were about 1,000 new coal power plants announced. And pre-permitted, and in last year, or the beginning of this year, only 500. Also, if you see the one on hold, that is the fourth from the bottom, almost 2/3 of those power plants are on hold. To give you a specific example, China has about 50,000 megawatts under construction in coal power plants, which will be all on hold because the capacity factor went down from around 70% to less than 50%. Also, India's coal power plant market stalled. There are 50,000 megawatts, or so that means 50 coal power plants under construction. The majority will not come online in time and will not operate economically because there's simply not the demand. And the latest draft of the National Electricity Plan in India shows that between 2022 and 2027, not a single new coal power plant will be built. That means that the market, the boom of the coal power plant market, is actually over. In terms of renewable capacity, the dark blue bars are all hydropower plants. So hydropower plants are by far the oldest power technology. In fact, for example, my home country, Germany, started with 100% renewables for only hydropower until the first coal power plant came into place around 1920. So it actually, it's a very old technology. The average hydropower plant in Europe is about 100 years old. And now the light blue and yellow capacity chips in, and that's all solar. Very encouraging is that in 2004, there were only 2 gigawatts, this little red circle there, so 2,000 megawatts, which is sort of like 2 coal power plants, installed capacity worldwide of solar. 12 years later, we are at 303 gigawatts, which is basically the capacity of Australia is about 45. So it's quite substantial. Again, Germany has 45 gigawatts solar photovoltaic installed, which is the installed capacity of Australia. And Germany is the size of New South Wales, actually a bit smaller. Who invests in renewables? It's not the industrialized world anymore. It's actually the developing world. It's China. It is also Brazil, increasingly the Asian countries, also around India. USA, despite all the rhetoric, is still a very large market for solar and wind, as well as Europe. And Middle East actually kicks in over the last few years quite substantially. In terms of the share of the capacity, that increased from around 20% to over 55% over the last 10 years. Again, in terms of the installed capacity of the mix, that means that the entire environment for electricity generation will actually change. And I try to explain that with this graph. Right now, we have like base load, we have some fluctuating variable wind and solar, and when we have dispatchable power, that's sort of the green thing. But once you increase the variable power like solar and wind, and you accept base load as base load, that means base load power plants operate 24/7. You can also think about you have a factory for shoes, and you rely on the capacity. You can sell 1,000 pair of shoes every month by definition. That's exactly the same as a baseload power plant. A baseload power plant just operates no matter if the market wants it or not. So if you accept that market model, then you have on peak times more electricity than you need, and then you can either curtail it, or you can store it, or you try to move the demand a bit. If you do not accept it, like for example in Denmark or in Spain or in Germany, then you cut into the baseload profile. And that means that coal power plants cannot operate 8,000 hours, or in China, that's the same situation right now, but only like 5,000 hours a year. Everybody knows that a year has 8,760 hours, I guess. So we have like from 8,000 hours down to 4,000 hours. That means if you calculate with the generation over the year, you might end up of around like 8 or 10 cents per kilowatt hour as an example. If you produce only half of that time, your electricity price actually increases substantially because you have to share the same amount of overhead cost through less kilowatt hours. So that's not an option. Then this is sort of the model we favor, and that's basically you have a base generation, which means all sun, all wind, whatever we have, we take into the system, and we build dispatchable power and including storage and demand-side management around that. And that also means that the business model, as Audrey talked about it, is very, very different, but actually far more innovative because there are far more people involved. You can have a business in terms of wind forecast, solar forecast, you can have a business in terms of storage, you can have demand-side management, all this. So there are a lot of small and new and medium-sized businesses involved in that system. Making a little bit of cut towards 100% renewables. My research focus here at UTS, at ISF, is 100% renewables. I modeled Australia. We did some Kangaroo Island, sort of a small community and island base, but I'm currently working on Tanzania, on a sort of an energy access country, in several other countries. We have also a project for Mindanao, for the Philippines. And we always have that question, is 100% renewables possible? We had a research project for the Renewable Energy Network for the 21st Century, which has been published, this result, actually in New York this April. And we asked, I can have a 1-hour presentation about that, but we asked many questions for all these energy experts around the world. There were about 114 energy experts, and we asked them, do you agree that 100% renewable is feasible and realistic on a global level? And 71% said yes, we are. There was some disagreement by when. Is it like 2050 or is it 2060? But it is a fairly high agreement that this is possible. Also, the people think that the share of global final energy, which means it's not just electricity, but also heating, cooling, and especially transport, will significantly increase. So that's actually a very good forecast for the market. Jumping to Australia. This is the curve of the power of the wind power market for Australia. It's for if you are a wind park developer, that curve is horror. That means you have sometimes only 100 megawatt market, which means like 50 turbines, which is sort of like 2 wind farms. Sometimes you have like 600 or 700, but you never know. And that's part of the problem is there's no real consistent regulation. The solar market is actually much better. Despite the noise, the solar market in Australia is actually really good and very, very stable, around like 800 to 1,000 megawatts. 25% of all Australian households already have solar, which is world leading. I mean, I think there's something we can be proud of in Australia to be actually so advanced, and the costs, and that's the reason why solar is so successful, went down significantly. We had a project about 100% renewables for Australia. Don't have the time to go in it in detail, just a few highlights. We need, in order to arrive there by around 2030, we need a market of stable around 4,000 megawatts solar per year. If you look to Germany, Germany had 7,500 megawatts a year for 4 years in a row, and on average is hovering around 2,000 and 3,000 megawatts. So it is possible. Same for wind. An average market should be 2,500 megawatts for wind in Australia. Germany has, since 1990 actually, 1999, around 3,000 megawatts each year. And again, Germany is so much smaller than Australia, and the wind resource in Australia is actually 50% better than in Germany. I skipped that. That would be the mix. So we have a lot of mix for solar and wind, but also dispatchable renewables, including concentrated solar power. And I'm very, very happy that the announcement of South Australia to build into concentrated solar power, because that has built-in storage, which is really good, and it's a very good option for Australia because not many industrialized countries actually can do it. like Germany has sort of 800 hours sunshine a year, and Australia has 2,000, 2,500. One of the reasons why I'm here the reason for that is you can actually operate concentrated power plants which operate with direct sunlight. My time is up. Just wanted to highlight one more thing. This is actually more or less same costs in terms of the system until 2030, because sort of the investment costs are fairly equal. But then it actually pays off, because at the end of the day there are no fuel costs involved, and that makes it in the long run cheaper. Moving to sort of the demand side management and energy efficiency, I want to close with that example. Denmark is a very small country, but also has 40% wind. It is interconnected, yes, but still there are very innovative ideas, and one idea I wanted to present is that they actually have communities which are self-sufficient over a few hours, like 6, 7, 8, 12 hours, and demand-side management from the grid operator in Denmark works as they actually cut off a city of, let's say, 200 megawatts for 2 hours or 3 hours. So they actually said, okay, now we have 200 megawatts too less wind, and we just cut off this city, and they are self-sufficient over a few hours, and then they bring them back online, and the consumer doesn't really feel anything. It's a bit science fiction. They work on it, but I think that has a lot of market opportunities, opportunities also for communities. And with that, I have to close. Thank you.